There is a slide up here I wanted to share. If we get the next slide. One more slide. Whoops, it disappeared. I don't know where that other slide went. But there is a slide that had the idea. I don't know how many of you have the YouVersion Bible app. And it's not a, there we go. It's not a marketing ploy to push particular applications, but this one is unique in the sense that it is the most popular one out there in the world today. It's produced by Life Church, lifechurch.tv. With that, we actually have events. And so you can search, about a half hour before the service, you can search for the events in your area. Maranatha will come up, and you can actually select that, and all the sermon notes from today's sermon and each week. You get the sermon notes, and you can even add your own notes within the application. So I would encourage you to get the YouVersion Bible, and I'm not sure if the other text didn't work, maybe this one won't either, but I will pursue afterwards to make sure that the links are sent your way. But I would encourage you that if you do have YouVersion, that you would go ahead and open it up and search for that event. And if you don't, go ahead and load it. You can have, I have 5 or 6 Bibles on my smartphone, so you can have multiples, and this is a very useful one for us, and since it allows us to post our sermon. Also, it's on a map, so anybody who looks up for events coming up that day, in YouVersion, we show up. I think there's only 4 in the immediate area today, so I would encourage you to take avail yourself of that. You know, one day a woman was rushing home from a doctor's appointment. The doctor had been somewhat delayed at the hospital, and so he came in a little late himself. The lab work took a little longer than usual, and by the time she left the clinic, she was running quite a bit extensively behind schedule. She still had to pick up her prescription, pick up the children from the babysitter, get home to make supper, and all in time to get back to the prayer meeting that was being held at the church that evening. And as she began to circle the busy Walmart parking lot looking for a space, wouldn't you know, the windows of heaven open up and the rain begins to pour down very, very hard. And she looks up and says, "Lord, you know what kind of day I've had. And there's still so much, an awful lot to do. Could you please grant me a parking space right away?" That was my plea to you today. Oh, and pretty close to the building if possible, so I don't get soaked. But that would be my prayer this morning. And the words weren't even completely out of her mouth when she saw the backup lights of a car coming up from the very end of the row. In fact, it was the best space in the whole parking lot, closest to the front door. She made straight for it, pulled in, and she got the best space. And she looked up and said, "Never mind, God, something just opened up." Now, the realities are we often take for granted the gifts that God gives us. We give the credit to coincidence when in reality it's God moving in our lives in a million little ways. And we've started a series, and we're now completing that series today. But we started a series called Love Where You Are. Now, it's not love where you are, because oftentimes that's difficult, but it's to love wherever you are. And that's the intent and the message there. You know, the saying is, wherever you go, there you are. And while it is not quite so philosophically deep, it's a very true statement. I mean, where you are placed is where God wanted you to be at that moment in time, and to use you. We're supposed to be loving people. We're supposed to be a church that loves so that others can see the love of God in us and demonstrate it in our lives. And last week we looked at loving others right where we live. Loving our family members, loving our neighbors, loving those who are in our oikos. And you may recall we described an oikos as a sphere of influence. What the Bible, the translators have put as house or household, is really just our sphere of influence. And so to love those right around where we are. Today we're finishing our series with Love Where You Go. Whether it's going to school in the morning or going on a vacation trip or going shopping at Walmart, as this young lady did in our example here, or going to work. It's wherever you're going. Now, again, not love where you work, but to love where you work. It doesn't mean we have to like our jobs. In reality, statistically, it's supposed to be 50 to 80% of people at any given time taking a survey don't like their job. But God still has you there, wherever that is, for a purpose and a reason. It's also for students. You are at a place where God has placed you right now, at the very school that you're supposed to be, with the classmates that you're supposed to have, and the teachers and professors that are there. And also for those of us who aren't going to work or going to school, whatever placement God has us, it's there for a purpose, and we need to realize that and look at that. You know, between the ages of 21 and 65, we will have spent on average 91,000 hours at work. That's fairly depressing if you think about it. 91,000 hours at work. A lot of time of our life is spent at work. A lot of time is spent at school. We don't want to just punch the clock or wait for the bell to ring so that we can get home, but to take advantage of the opportunities to love every single person that Christ has crossing our path. If you have your Bibles open, perhaps that Bible app we discussed earlier, if you have your Bibles open, go to Colossians 3 with me, if you will. Paul is going to talk about living out our faith in the work environment, but I got to give you a heads up. He's going to do so in a rather unique context. He's going to do so in the context of slaves and masters. Anytime you look at the word slavery or slave or slaving in the New Testament, you almost want the author to stand up and give his best "I have a dream" speech, right? Of how slavery is so terrible and all that. And we don't understand why God doesn't condemn slavery more strongly. Now, he does, by the way. Some Bible critics say, well, the Bible is very much in favor of slavery. That's not true. 1 Timothy 1, the first 10 verses talks about the lawbreakers and the rebels, the ungodly, the sinful, the unholy. And included in that list in verse 10 are slave traders as well. We also have to remember that slavery then was totally different than it was in our horrific history before the Civil War, or even the sex trade slavery that exists today. 1/3 of the population is estimated throughout the entire Roman Empire were slaves of one sort or another. 1 out of every 3 people. Some of them were spoils of war. When you won over another country or another nation, you took some of them as slaves. Or they sold themselves into slavery, known as bond servant. In fact, the word that's translated so often in the New Testament as servant is actually bond servant or slave. So when we say we're a servant of Jesus Christ, we are a bond servant. What's that mean? It means that you actually voluntarily give yourself up as a slave to that individual. And there are many of those listed in the Scriptures, but also we know from history, who felt their lives could be better as a slave under someone than on their own. Slaves in the New Testament era were often well educated. So you had slaves who were doctors and teachers and writers and accountants, secretaries. Pretty much similar to the workplace we know today. Slaves back then could own property. Again, not the kind of slavery that we experienced in the first 100 years of our country, but there was slavery nonetheless. And Paul shows us through this passage how to love others where we work, where we go to school, where we live our lives. But his approach again was to talk about how masters should treat their slaves and slaves to work for their masters. And so in chapter 3, verse 22, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything you do. Try to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. Serve them sincerely because of your reverent fear of the Lord. Work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. We're to be ambassadors of his love in the workplace. No matter what you do, no matter what profession you have found yourself in, you're on an assignment from God, and you're put there to make a difference. We need to remember it's Jesus that we're actually working for. As Christians, we take a whole different spin on this motivation. I'm not working for a boss. I'm not working for a paycheck. I'm not working for a company. I'm working on behalf of Jesus Christ. And so it's because of that, it's not only I need to do my best when the boss is watching, but all the time, as for the Lord, the best that we can. So this discussion then really takes the boss out of the question. You know, the number one reason that people say they don't like their boss, they sort of surveyed, what was the number one response? You know what it was? I think it's kind of interesting. It's because he's always telling me what to do. Well, actually, that's a but that's what bosses do, right? Well, you can probably show me example of those. Yeah, but you don't understand. My boss makes unreasonable demands. He's a micromanager kind of person. She plays favorites with her employees. And it can make it difficult and challenging, but you don't work for that boss. I know your boss will tell you differently, but you actually work as a Christian. You work for Jesus Christ, as Paul says. And now we should have a totally different motivation when we go to work, when we go to school, when we go out and do life, right? One person put it this way, my work is to be my worship. What would that look like? If we took our work experience and said, you know what, today I'm going to work, but I'm going to worship. And your life as an employee at that location, your life as a student at that location, was to worship God and to serve others that God has placed in your path. Whatever you do can be an act of worship to God. And now he addresses the masters, or the bosses, if you will. Colossians 4:1. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. He's saying to the masters, or the bosses in this case, just as you have authority over people, and they have to be accountable to you, remember that God has authority over you, and you will have to be accountable to him as well someday. So make sure you treat your employees properly. In fact, all of this thing, the idea of the slaves behaving properly and the masters behaving properly, can be summarized well in another verse in 1 Corinthians 16:14. It says, and do everything with love. That would be the summary of this whole passage. We're to love the people we work with. Now, it is obviously no challenge to love people who love us first, right? That's pretty easy. It's the others that make it so difficult. A lot of people like their jobs. It's the people they don't like, right? Not their work, but their co-workers that they really can't stand. I'd love my work if there weren't any people here. There was a book called High Maintenance Relationships, written by Les Parrott. It describes several difficult types of people. And I would ask, as I go through this list, if you would think of some of those people, right? Now, see if you can picture in your mind the face of that individual or a name of that person. Now, if it's the person sitting next to you, I would caution you to look straight ahead. Do not blink. Do not breathe funny, because they're going to realize that you think that individual is one of these people. But let's go through the list here. Number one is the critic. This person is constantly complaining, nagging, giving unwanted advice. Kind of seems like, are there any married people here? Yeah, okay. This may apply to you. No, put your hands down. That's not the thing to do. But this kind of person knows how and when to do everything better than you do, right? If you know that kind of individual, you cannot possibly show off in front of this person. Feels like one of their hobbies is pointing out your mistakes. What's my hobbies? Well, I like fishing, I like snowboarding, and I like to point out your mistakes. That's this type of individual, the critic. Another one is the martyr. Well, this person's the forever victim, always racked with self-pity, always complaining they're not appreciated for the work they do. No one notices how hard I work. Want people to feel sorry for them. Those are the type of people when you walk up to them and say, hey, well, how was your weekend? And you immediately say, I wish I hadn't asked that question. Because they're going to tell you, and they're just going to lay it all open for you. The third type of difficult person that he lists is the wet blanket. This is the pessimist, the one that automatically is negative all the time. Even when they try to say something positive, it comes out being negative, right? You look a lot bigger than you used to. Right? Or, I don't like that beard on you. I don't think it does your face any good. Or maybe you're sitting next to somebody, you know, the same individual, you know he's going to be negative, and all through the entire wedding, for instance, you know, they don't say a word of negativity, and you get almost to the end, and they say, too bad the groom couldn't have lost just 10 pounds more. They always have to say something negative. They try to be positive, but can't help themselves. You know, those type of people also are in the church. Often you'll hear somebody come up and, you know, they'll talk to you about your sermon that day. I love these two here. You know, I really appreciate your easy-to-understand messages. Our previous pastor, he was deep. Okay. Well, then there's this one. You know, I really loved the sermon. The conclusion was my favorite part. That one makes me pause to think as well. But the wet blanket, the pessimist. Number 4 is the superstar. This one always has to get attention, right? Always has a story to tell. In fact, always has a bigger story to tell than your story is. No matter what you claim happened recently, they'll say, oh yeah? Well, mine is even bigger than that, right? And in fact, that type of person is kind of fun, because what you can do is imagine the most outlandish, wildest thing, say it, and listen for the story that's going to come out of this individual. Because it will be bigger, it will be grander, right? It's all about me. The social media, if you look at their social media, basically everything they write, they post is my life, my kids, my marriage. It's all better than yours. Right? And that's their whole focus in life. Or number 5, the steamroller. This person's boldly insensitive to others. Doesn't care how they feel as he or she says things that might bother them. And when you bring it up, that person will immediately go defensive and say, hey, I was just telling the truth. I was trying to help. But that's the steamroller. Number 6 is the control freak. Always has to be in charge. Has to micromanage everything that happens. And that individual can tell you how they would have done your job better than you. And every single time it would have been better than you, as they say it, right? Number 7 is the backstabber. This person cannot be trusted, right? This is the person who is right along, it kind of hides during the project while it's going on, especially for those students in here. You may think of a lab project with 3 or 4 other students. And this person does none of the work, right? But at the end, jumps up and claims all the credit for having gotten it done. This person will agree with you on everything, but in some public forum will immediately be able to say that they disagree, and I don't know how this person ever came up with that idea. That's the backstabber. The next is that green-eyed monster, full of envy, full of jealousy. This type of person, in order to build themselves up, the only way they know how to do it is to tear somebody else down, right? And that's a tough personality to be around. And lastly, number 9, the sponge. This type of person always needs something but never gives back, right? Always needs loving but never gives love back. Always needs but never can give anything back. Now, as I go through those 9, can you imagine some names, some faces that might go along with each of these personalities? Maybe a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, maybe a fellow student. But here's the question. Would any of these have identified you? If you can't find yourself in any one of those, we probably need another category. Number 10 is those that can't figure out that they have problems, right? Maybe we are the difficult ones to work with, to live with, and we need to realize that. Paul tells us how we can love and treat one another in these verses, even the difficult people. In the next chapter, Colossians 4:2, it says, devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and being thankful. Be alert. Pay attention. Just not being there. You have to be present there. Be there in all ways. And to be thankful. Basically having an attitude of gratitude. Always being aware of the blessings we have through Jesus Christ. We as Christians have the joy of Jesus Christ, and it should show. And we should be thankful for his grace. Then it goes on in verse 3. It says this, and pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Often when we read these letters, we forget that many of them are called prison epistles for a reason. He wrote them while in prison. And this wasn't county jail. This was a prison where he was shackled on all sides, usually had a Roman guard alongside him as well. And yet notice here, what does he pray for? Now, if it were us, we'd probably pray for delivery. Get us out of here. Please rescue me from this thing. That is not what he does. See, while Paul's writing this in prison, he could be easily saying, I know you don't like your job. I understand that, but I'm on assignment at my job in prison. Okay? I understand you may not like your cubicle at work in your office, but I'm standing here in chains, and I'm telling you, you need to be praying for others. And so what does Paul ask for? He asks for praying to help opportunities basically to share the gospel. Open the doors and to share it clearly. You too need to be praying for the people you work with, the people you meet, to pray for opportunities to share his love and his gospel with these individuals. And verse 5, be wise in the way you act toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. Outsiders. When Paul was talking about it, he's mentioning those who don't know Jesus or don't know Jesus yet. God has given us to them to show his love, and we need to make the most of every opportunity. The Greek has 2 words for time. Either there's a generic sense, or there's a specific time, an appointment, if you will. And that's the meaning here in this use of the word. So this opportunity is an appointment. That God has a divine appointment. He's given you opportunities as appointments, and you need to seek them out. You probably have appointments in your calendar. God has things on your calendar too, and there will be people in your path. We need to pray for eyes to be open, to take every opportunity. It's not an accident that you see these people, the people that you do, every day. God has you there for a purpose. You know, sometimes people at work think, well, I'm not a pastor, so I can't minister. But there are so many ways at school or at work that you can do that. I've heard of some individual, one that had a complete card system, a greeting card system in their desk. And when somebody at work was sick or was at home with for some other reason, maybe a loss in their family, would send out these cards and put a little blessing and a scripture reference in there. Or I've heard of a truck driver who would give out blessing bags to the other truck drivers that are passing through the truck stop. Or meals for coworkers when they're going through a tough time. Bringing a meal to their home. You know, I heard you were having a tough time. I thought maybe this would help. And again, sharing a prayer or a verse there. Having a jar on your desk for prayer requests where your coworkers know that you're one of these God freaks, right? But you pray. And so they can put in a prayer request into that jar and know that you will pray for them. Or a boss who uses a book of Proverbs as an employee training manual, if you will. Or first responders who offer to pray with the victims and their families. There's always opportunities. Now, I'm going to show you briefly here, as quick as I can here, 5 ways that God may introduce divine appointments in your life. I am a firm believer that people do not come into your life by coincidence, that God sets up divine appointments. And here's one way. Number 1, an unexpected kindness can become a divine appointment. Our example here comes from 1 Kings chapter 17. You know, when you think of the evil kings in Israel, none is probably more infamous than Ahab and his wife, who was named Jezebel. Ahab and Jezebel. 1 Kings 16 says this. First, Ahab built a temple and an altar for Baal in Samaria. Then he set up an Asherah pole. He did more to provoke the anger of God, the God of Israel, than any of the other kings of Israel before him. That's how terrible he was. Baal was a Canaanite weather god, had the power over lightning and rain and wind and fertility. Infants would be burned alive as sacrificial offerings to the deity, intended to produce economic prosperity by prompting Baal to bring rain for the fertility of Mother Earth. And so they would bring all of these things. Now, you may not remember this, but in 2015, remember when ISIS was destroying all kinds of temples and things they came across? An actual Baal temple was destroyed. It was a 2,000-year-old temple to the god Baal. And they destroyed it in Palmyra, Syria. Now, an Asherah pole was a sacred tree or pole that stood near Canaanite religious locations. This was a tree, again, to honor the pagan goddess Asherah, who was the wife of their supposed creator god. And so these were pagan gods and pagan temples. And this is what Ahab put in place there in the land. Goes on, 1 Kings 17 starts, Now Elijah, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab, As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word. Then the Lord said to Elijah, Go to the east and hide by Kerith Brook, near where it enters the Jordan River. Drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you, for I have commanded them to bring you food. This famine that's talked about lasted 3.5 years. The king was very, very upset and was looking to destroy Elijah to break the famine if he could. And so he did rightly. Verse 5, So Elijah did as the Lord told him, camped beside Kerith Brook, east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening, and he drank from the brook. But after a while, the brook dried up, for there was no rainfall anywhere in the land. So then the passage goes on that the Lord told Elijah to go live in the village of Zarephath and look for a widow there. And so he went, verse 10. He went to Zarephath. As he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks. And he asked her, Would you please bring me a little water in a cup? And as she was going to get it, he called her, Can you bring me a bite to eat too? Verse 12, But she said, I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house. In fact, I only have 1 handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of our oil jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I were going to go off and die. Verse 13, But Elijah said to her, Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you've said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again. Now she faced a dilemma. Do I take the word of the stranger who claims to be a prophet of God feed him first and may not have anything left for my son and I? Or at least be able to eat our last meal together and just kind of send him off? Well, she didn't send him off. Verse 15. So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many, many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. You know, kindness to those we meet along the way results in blessings for them. Hebrews 13:2 says, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without even realizing it. So number one, an unexpected kindness can bring a divine appointment. Number two, an unexpected meeting can become a divine appointment. And this story comes from 2 Kings chapter 8. 2 Kings centers around a Shunammite lady who had been blessed by Elisha's ministry. Elisha was Elijah's successor. Not only was she blessed with the miracle of a child earlier, about 4 chapters earlier, but later that now grown-up son was raised from the dead at one point by the power of God. And on Elisha's instruction, she had left her home and gone to Philistine territory to avoid another famine, a 7-year famine this time. And now that the famine was over, she'd come back only find to her dismay that her house and her land had been seized and taken from her. She was at her wit's end. She didn't know what to do. And in her desperation, this lady with her son went to see the king, hoping for a suitable answer, for maybe some small mercy of some kind that he could bestow upon her. Now, little did she know that God had prepared a divine appointment for her on that very day. Not only through meeting the king, but also meeting unexpectedly Gehazi, Elisha's own servant. It so happened that when she entered and cried unto the king, he was at that very moment having a spiritual chat with this Gehazi gentleman about all the things that Elisha had done. And Elisha pointed out that, the servant pointed out that Elisha had actually raised this lady's son from the dead. Talk about divine appointments. The shocked king was probably speechless for quite a bit, but then finally asked the lady whether this was true, and she affirmed it. The end result was that she not only got her house and land back, but also the income from the land for the past 7 years. That was a divine appointment. In life, God sends many unexpected people across our paths. We meet them in supermarkets and concerts and funerals and social functions. Many times we may consider such meetings as irrelevant or even sometimes irritants in our busy schedule. But could it be many times that God is sending them to us unexpectedly as divine appointments? Either as a blessing for them or maybe even to the public, but divine appointments nonetheless. Such meetings are also great opportunities to share the gospel. The third way a divine appointment might show up in your life is an unexpected crisis can become a divine appointment. Are you staggering an unexpected crisis now in your life? Crisis situations don't warn us before they hit. That's the definition of crisis. However, they may be leading you yet to a divine appointment. In 1 Samuel chapter 29, God had just helped David and his men to get out of what was a very difficult situation. In chapter 30, as they returned home and an unexpected crisis had struck, their home city, which was Ziklag, had been raided and torched by the Amalekites, and their families were taken captive. Under God's direction, David began to pursue the enemy and eventually found the very person who could lead him to the raiders. It seemed that this was a dying servant of an Amalekite official who had been deserted, since he was sick and a burden to the troops. They left him behind. And since David then spared this man's life, he was more than willing to lead them to the camp of the raiders themselves. And as a result, David and his men won a great victory before any harm could come to their families, and received much, much more than what they had thought they had lost. An unexpected crisis then can often turn into a divine appointment with God. Number 4, an unexpected delay can become a divine appointment. No one likes delays in life. I know I surely don't. I've got 2 jobs and this pastorate, and I schedule everything very, very tightly. I bring books and computers everywhere I go in case there's some kind of a delay. I can catch up on some reading that I need to do or whatever. And so when there's a delay, it can really wreak havoc in my schedule and in my planned day. We live in an instant world. We have instant food, instant noodles, online banking, quick promotions, quick turnovers, rapid solutions. Any delay, therefore, is uncomfortable, right? An irritant in our life. But God has often His own timing in our lives, and He can turn the delays into divine appointments still. In the book of Esther, remember the book of Esther, we read in chapter 2 how Mordecai uncovered an assassination plot on the king of a mighty empire, King Xerxes. And as he revealed the details of the plot of the king through Esther, his cousin, the conspirators were apprehended and the king's life was saved. But his only reward was his name being recorded in a record book that it happened. And then they forgot. By chapter 5, Mordecai was about to be hanged now on a large gallows in the center of the city due to a conspiracy by a wicked official named Haman. Right? That's when if it was a melodrama, that where we go, boo, yeah, exactly. And so Haman was there, but God had planned a divine appointment at this time. And in chapter 6, the king couldn't sleep that night. Perhaps that was divinely appointed as well. And like any humble man, he wanted to read about all his exploits. So he called for the recorder and to read it out. And it was no coincidence that he turned to the story of how Mordecai had saved the king's life. The king then learned that Mordecai had received no reward for that effort. Man may forget, but God never forgets. Immediately, the king planned a reward scheme for Mordecai, and of all people, Haman himself was chosen to do the honors. And as a result, not only Mordecai's life, but the entire Jewish race was eventually saved from possible destruction. The delay had been turned into a divine appointment. Trust God, therefore, through the delays of your life. You may just be on the verge yourself of another divine appointment. Number 5, an unexpected change of plans can become a divine appointment. I'm sure you've made some good plans for your life. Most people do. But sometimes our plans get changed suddenly due to unforeseen circumstances that get in the way and intervene. Of course, nobody enjoys change, but if we could trust the Lord in the midst of change that may be uncomfortable, we may very well see yet another divine appointment. In Acts chapter 8, Philip was in the middle of a revival in Samaria. He was bringing people to Jesus left and right, and a trip through the desert was hardly on his mind at that moment. In chapter 10 of Acts, Peter would never have dreamed of ever going to a Gentile home, period, much less to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. God, however, changed their plans. Acts 8, verse 26, as for Philip, an angel of the Lord said to him, go south down the desert road that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza. So he started out, and he met the treasurer of Ethiopia, a eunuch of great authority under the Candace, the queen of Ethiopia. The eunuch had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and he was now returning. Philip was able to teach the scriptures to this palace official from Ethiopia and ended up baptizing him. For Peter, he had led the effort to reach his fellow Jews with the gospel. As far as he knew, that was his mission in life, to tell other Jews about Jesus Christ. But in Acts chapter 10, Peter had a strange vision from God, and Peter was totally confused. What in the world could it possibly mean? Acts 10, verse 19. Meanwhile, as Peter was puzzling over the vision, the Holy Spirit said to him, 3 men have come looking for you. Get up, go downstairs, and go with them without hesitation. Don't worry, for I have sent them. So Peter went down and said, I'm the man you're looking for. Why have you come? Verse 22, they said, we were sent by Cornelius, a Roman officer. He's a devout and God-fearing man, well respected by all the Jews. And a holy angel instructed him to summon you to his house so that he can hear your message. Cornelius was a Roman captain. He was a captain of a regiment of men, and he was a Gentile of all Gentiles, told by God to seek out Peter, who believed that the Gentiles did not deserve the gospel of Jesus Christ. Verse 28, Peter told them, you know it is against our laws for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home or to associate with you, but God has shown me that I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean. And as a result, Peter saw a powerful revival in the Gentile home of Cornelius. In fact, it said the whole household, remember that word oikos, was saved. Only eternity will reveal the full results of these changes that God ordained in the lives for Philip and Peter. Even though they would never have planned that themselves, look at how the gospel is spread because of it. So think of these ways. These are just 5 ways. There's possibly many more. But an unexpected kindness can lead to a divine appointment. An unexpected meeting with somebody could lead to a divine appointment. An unexpected crisis in your life can lead to a divine appointment. Unexpected delay in your plans or unexpected change of plans. All of these can lead to possibly a divine appointment. We need to make the most of every opportunity to serve and love others. Colossians 4:6, the last verse of our passage. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Are our words filled with grace? When you're talking with people at work, at school, at the store, at the mall, in the theater, hopefully not in the theater, but in the waiting area outside there, are your words filled with grace? Are they filled with gossip and criticism or constant complaining? The words we use, the tone we use can do so much for our testimony, but it can also do so much against our testimony for Jesus Christ. You know, when you let others know that you are a Christian, you are carrying the banner of Jesus Christ with you. And everything you say, everything you do, reflects not only you and your testimony and your personal witness, but Jesus Christ himself. So how many of you are indecisive? Anybody have a hard time thinking things through, maybe doing it right away? I have that trouble too. We often see opportunity, but it passes us before we do something about it. But Willie, I know you were one to raise your hand. You can't be that indecisive because you were the only one who raised his hand. So you made it.
I can decide.
Oh, yeah. We need to make that happen, though, less and less. We need to be observant, see it, and act upon it. So whether you're able to unexpectedly help someone else in need, maybe faced with an unexpected meeting or going through an unexpected crisis or delay or change of plan, God may just be preparing you for a divine appointment. Let me close with these two thoughts. Number one, any unexpected situation can be a divine appointment. And every divine appointment will bring divine blessing. Let us pray.